Hey, folks, my name is John Wilson, and this is our uh, November webinar this month. It's called the fourth option. It's an interesting webinar because it was born out of a story that I used to tell in other workshops that I gave, and I will begin with that story, and then we're going to examine some creative behavior management techniques that both parents and people that you're talking with could utilize at home to try and nurture the behavior and development of young people with learning disabilities and ADHD. Uh, so, as always, a couple quick reminders. You're welcome to throw out a question in the chat bar, and we will circle back to those. If you want to see other webinars that we've produced, you can go to soarnc.org/webinars. Brittany will post that link here in the chat bar here in just a moment. And eventually, here later this week, this webinar, along with the PowerPoint that is attached, will be available for review. Anybody can watch them at any time. This is our effort to try and support the field, families, and anyone looking to nurture the dynamic lives of these incredible young people that we have a chance to serve. SOAR is a nonprofit adventure-based residential boarding school, summer camp, and gap year program serving kids with learning and attention challenges. And I am delighted to share with you the fourth option. It begins with a story. And when I was in the 8th grade, I was tasked with giving a lecture about Babyface Nelson. And I wanted to do something different. It wasn't just enough to stand up in front of a class and give the report. I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if I actually gave the report as if I was Babyface Nelson? And I was doing so in the first person. So I started looking around for, an outfit. And I had a pair of black church shoes that were fine. And I had a tie. What I didn't have was suits that looked like they were of the time. But my dad had a suit, and he was out of town again. So I went into his closet and I pulled out this pinstripe double-breasted suit. And while the jacket was, kind of big on me. I mean, let's face it, I was, probably 5'4", 5'6", and he was 6'4". I could tuck in the sleeves, and even though it was baggy, it kind of looked like the pictures. The problem was the pants. No matter what I did to the pants, they just would come unrolled, and it just didn't look right. So, being a creative problem solver, I had a solution. That's right. I cut the pants to fit. And then I cut them just long enough and took them to a neighbor who hemmed them for me. She even put in cuffs when she heard what I was doing. And so now I had the full outfit. Well, my dad came home, and it turns out it wasn't just any, suit. It was his most expensive worsted wool, double-breasted pinstripe suit. And I had taken it out of his closet without his permission for a one-time school assignment, and had cut the pants to fit, basically destroying the suit. So at dinner that night, he said, "Johnny, do I understand that you took one of my suits out of my closet, cut the pants to fit, took it over to Vicky Dubray's, had her hem the pants for you so that you could give a lecture as if you were Babyface Nelson?" And I looked kind of ashamed. I hadn't really thought about what the consequences of that would be. And I said, "Yes, sir." Now, you have to understand, this is happening very publicly at the dinner table. And my younger brother is just over there, just gleefully waiting for Dad to rain down terror on me. And my father looked over at me. He said, "You amaze me. You really are one of the most incredible problem solvers I've ever met. And certainly your creativity is off the charts, and you demonstrate yet again an ability to do really unique things. I can't tell you how proud of you I am. Well, I mean, I was really taken aback. I mean, you know what? I was in the 8th grade, which meant I was probably 14 years old. I still feel that in my chest, that sense of pride that my dad shared with me at the table, on the heels of thinking that I was in big trouble. My brother, looked devastated, so sad that I wasn't in trouble. And my dad got it from the table, and he came over to where I was sitting, and he reached down and he kind of gave me a big hug. Yeah, maybe a little harder than he needed to, but there it was, this moment, this defining moment in our lives. And years later, I asked him, Dad, why did you go that route? So before I tell you what his answer was, that's called a teaser. Before I tell you what his answer was, let's think about what he could have done, right? He could have punished me. That's it. You've lost all your allowance. You're grounded. You may not leave this room for a month. And that was probably consistent with parenting strategies at the time. He could have used like a logical consequence. He could have gone into my room and taken something of value of mine without my permission and destroyed it. And so there would have been kind of a quid pro quo there. He could have just blown it off like it didn't matter and ignored the whole thing and just never even mentioned it. But my dad chose a fourth option. And the fourth option was born out of this answer. He told me, he said, son, when you were that age, you didn't have a lot of victories to hang your hat on. And I wanted to make sure that I gave, that I thought about what was it I really wanted. And I asked myself, I gave it the 5-year test. In 5 years, will that suit still matter? Well, in 5 years, that suit might not even fit. I don't have a lot of suits that I wear for more than 5 years. And so what would still matter in 5 years? And having you as a human being with your self-esteem intact seemed like a really good option. And so I decided to do something in that moment that would focus on what I wanted, which was for you to have a healthy sense of self and a healthy self-esteem. And so out of that was born this idea of creative behavior management, or thinking about what is the fourth option. Not the obvious option, not the blow it off option, but how do I get to where I really want to go? So I'm going to talk a little bit about ways that we look at our kids that might help us identify how we want to get there, and focus on some of the things that my dad wanted to focus on that day. All right. The first obvious when you're going to, have a significant interaction with your child is to kind of ask yourself the same question my dad asked himself, which was, what do I really want? And is what I'm about to do going to get me closer or further away than what I really want? Then you set the goal. And then think about, what are the strategies that are going to move the needle? And sometimes the more creative those get, the more powerful they are. Review your progress, and then create this sort of failing forward mentality. I've talked about failing forward, that failing forward mindset. I think we've even have a webinar on it, but I'm going to review just for a moment what that really means. See, successful adults with learning disabilities have learned how to become problem solvers, and they turn challenges into opportunities. They come to learn failure as part of the learning process. Well, I know that doesn't work. And you know who's the most prolific at that in a really viable way was Thomas Edison. I think when he was asked, how he discovered finally had success with the light bulb, he said, I learned 2,186 ways how not to make a light bulb. And viewing it as practice or work towards success is critical to that willingness to fail forward mindset. And part of one of the structures that I coach and teach here is, teaching the API method of problem solving, assessment. What is it I really want? What is the real question I'm trying to answer? What are my resources? How can I get there from here? Make a plan, implement that plan, and evaluate that plan. Now, one of the reasons why implement is larger than the other words here in API is because our kids use the same process, only they don't do a whole lot of assessing or planning, do they? They jump right into implementation. Now, here is a really creative opportunity, because for a long time, I would try and discourage kids from implementing a plan before following through, and say, no, hold on. First, we have to identify our resources, and we got to really ask what the problem is, and then we have to make a plan. And it finally dawned on me one day that our kids jumping into the mix, and making a mess of things, and obviously they're going to fail right away, is part of their assessment, because they don't know what they don't know. And so failure actually becomes such a critical and integral part for them to understand the nuances of what they don't know, because visualizing or comprehending those things is so far beyond the scope of their ability that they have to get in, see it, sniff it, smell it, feel it, embrace it, fail at it before they can move forward. And knowing that was part of what they are, I now allow kids to jump right in, sometimes into a situation, make mistakes, and then we learn from those mistakes so that we can fail forward with a new plan. I think as part of creative behavior management, we also want to make sure that we're structuring environments for success. And one of my favorite things about the kids that we've served at SOAR for years and years and years is their incredible innate ability and want to be helpful. They thrive on it, and they thrive on the accolades and the support and the loving, nurturing energy that comes from your appreciation when they are helpful. And so as we find creative ways to use their strengths in a way that support others, we look for something that Sam Goldstein and Robert Brooks called islands of competence. Where are we successful? Where are our kids able to find ability? We remove those distractions and we allow for an experiential learning opportunity. And then we develop organizational strategies that work. I'm going to revisit this at the end of my workshop and tell you a story about how I tried to create an island of competence for my son and allowed him to experientially learn something that allowed him to really move forward in life. So when we talk about organization, how do we creatively help our kids understand the power of organization? Inherently, there are systems that if we know that in our lives we have these little systems. You've seen it. They have things that work. Talking about my son, he was a terrible, disorganized mess. Everything was everywhere. And then one day I realized he had all of his toy cars in a bag, in a little special bag. And he had all of his Thomas the Tank Engine trains in a special bag. He'd sort of separated those out because those were his favorite toys and he could access them. And we just needed to find ways to do more of that for him. Many of you and your children are multitaskers. And how do we embrace those abilities? How many of you are list makers? How many of you know the unmitigated joy of crossing something off your list? And I assume many of you nodded your head at that. How many of you have actually written something down that wasn't on the list, but should have been on the list, but now it's been done so that you can cross it off that list? Finally, I think it's really important not to impose systems on our kids, organizational or otherwise, because if I were to come into your home and implement my organizational system, it would fail after a few days because it doesn't take you into account. And so whenever we are utilizing organization or, quite frankly, behavior management, we have to take into account what works. And that becomes even more difficult if you've got two kids, right? Because one method may work really well for one of your children and not at all for the other. Then you get the "that's not fair." By the way, "Fair is not equal" is one of our webinars. If you want to check out some of our other webinars on our website. Is your child aware of their unique strengths and, quite frankly, of their challenges? How much positive reinforcement do you use? Have you figured out ways to turn challenges into strengths? And we're going to talk about that here in a minute. If you've seen any of my webinars, you will recognize the next couple of slides because I integrate them into a lot of what I talk about, because from a paradigm shift, it is the basis of my perspective. Do you create and keep a list of victories, talents, and abilities? Now, I'm going to show you two squares here. I have a small square and I have a large square. One of those squares is for you to maintain and keep the list of challenges. The other square is for you to keep and list them and maintain the victories and the wonderful strengths of your child. Which one is which? Now, I believe you are all savvy enough to know, especially based on my perspective of being strength focused, that the big box is really for the strengths and the abilities and the victories, and that the small box is for the challenges. The sad part is that even though you know that, sometimes we are so predisposed and caught up in all the challenges that we will do subtle little things. And here's a metaphor for what we do. We give lip service to the wonderful traits, and we acknowledge those, but then we'll write really small in the little box so we can fit more in. And that's not why that small box is there. It's there because if you only focus on one or two of the challenge areas, you can really invest in them. But some of our kids, have experienced so little of the accolade and the victories that we want to really help them thrive on their successes, because success begets success. All right, so here's what I was talking about, these hidden strengths. And I'll do it quickly because it is in so many of my webinars. Is your child stubborn? Yes. But there's a tenacity there. You know how important that stubborn quality is? It may be the thing that sees them through into adulthood, because let's face it, for them, life is a little harder. Are they distractible? Well, yes. But there's also a multitask ability there. It's one of my greatest strengths. Do they perseverate? Well, sure they do. They get caught on this, what I call sticky thinking. And, but in that hidden strength there, careers are made out of their ability to be ultra focused on something. Are they oversensitive? You bet. But there's also this empathic and intuitive nature to our children that is just so remarkable. This feeds the next one. Do you have an idea for your story yet? No, I'm waiting for inspiration. You can't just turn on creativity like a faucet. You have to be in the right mood. What mood is that? Last minute panic. So I ask you, are they procrastinators? Well, yeah, we are. But I would say we're deadline dependent. And for instance, how many of you, and just answer the question for yourself, how many of you finished a term paper or a research assignment or something, even work related, at the midnight hour before it was due? You didn't have it done weeks before it was due. You got it done right at the end of the timeline. Yeah. Certainly that's something that I have endured most of my life. But here's a little known secret. When you create a situation where there's the right amount of arousal, stress, it begins to allow your brain to kind of fire on all cylinders. And so not only sometimes does that work happen more quickly, when there's a deadline looming. It can also be really quality work. Now, if the stress of that deadline is so overwhelming, it can be crushing. But like so many others in this country, I am deadline dependent, and so are your children. And understanding that, you can creatively begin to use that. I'm going to give you a little strategy right now. Homework. So my son really struggled with some of the history reading. And so in order to try and get through a question, let's say there were 10 questions that he had to answer by reading the text. I would sit down with him and I'd say, okay, you have 5 minutes to find the answer to question number 1, go. And then I would time him. And now he's racing. All right. We've created that heightened sense of there's a little short deadline. Okay, stop. What have you got? I didn't quite get it. No, write down something. All right. Now, you ready for another 5 minutes? All right, go. And now we're starting to break that up into these little small components, adding the tooth of a deadline, and the synapses start to fire just a little bit more effectively. Are we disorganized? Yes, we certainly are. But with that comes a sense of flexibility that I think a lot of our kids have demonstrated, sort of this creative way that they look at the world. Are we daydreamers? You bet. But we're also creative. Are we rigid? Some of us, yeah. And interestingly, this whole concept came out of a kid who was particularly rigid. I was watching him. We called him Double J, and he ordered his breakfast. We were driving back from the Florida Keys, and he ordered his breakfast. I want, my eggs cooked hard as a hockey puck with bacon on the side. And he was very specific about how he wanted his eggs. But I've recently caught back up with Double J, and that rigidity allowed him to become a thriving paramedic working in Myrtle Beach. Are our kids manipulative? Well, sure they are. They can be incredibly manipulative, but that also belies leadership, because what is manipulation? Getting others to do the things that you want to do because that's what you want. Now, there's a selfishness there, but in essence, there are also the seeds of leadership. So instead of having stubborn, distractible, persevering, oversensitive, procrastinating, disorganized, daydreaming, rigid little manipulators, you are raising tenacious, multitaskable, ultra-focused, intuitive, deadline-dependent, flexible, creative, structured leaders. And when you begin to see your kids that way, guess what happens? That's right. They begin to see themselves that way. Now, while we're celebrating their strengths, I think any kind of creative parenting has to include accountability. And one of my favorite ways to hold individuals accountable is the use of natural and logical consequences, which we'll talk about in a second. I think it's critical that you ensure there's clarity when giving expectations. And you always want to differentiate your love and caring for a child versus your disapproval for a particular behavior. I coach families to try and avoid using the word disappointment. It's lazy parenting. I love you. I don't like what you did. And let's talk about that and come up with a way to make sure that something happens differently in the future. So let's talk about natural and logical consequences. A natural consequence is defined as, it's a result that without any additional interference from you or an authority figure, there's something going to happen. They leave their shoes out. They only had the one pair of shoes, and now they're having to wear wet shoes. They leave their bike out, and the chain rusts, or the bike gets stolen. A logical consequence is defined as a consequence that are created by an adult, but that logically relate to the behavior. One of them is if a child puts somebody down, they owe them 3 put-ups. Or, if they leave a bike out, then the bike gets locked up and they can't use it for 2 days. Or their shoes get wet, and they've got to spend the extra time, figuring out a way to get those shoes dried. What the mistake that some parents make is they will give a consequence that doesn't have a link to the action. For instance, you left your bike out, and so because you left your bike out, you don't get allowance. Because you left your bike out, you're grounded for a week. Because you left your bike out, you don't get dessert for dinner. Because you left your bike out, you can't go out with your friends tonight. You can't go to the movies on Saturday that you were going to go to. Those kinds of punishments, those become punishments. So consequences really need to be creative in how they fit the action that led to them. Here are some examples. A put down, we talked about that one. Well, creative consequences, they have to give 3 sincere compliments, and they've got to work at it. At SOAR, we call them put ups and put downs. You put somebody in, and they owe you 3 ups. And then the kids will get lazy with it and say, you're nice, you're cool, you're funny. Well, what's nice about me? Why do you think I'm cool? Tell me something you thought I said that was funny. So some actual sincere work has to go into providing those put downs, because if I begin to engage more positively in that, then I have to invest. If there were put downs on my family, we would stop and we would play my favorite thing about you game. And everybody would go around and say, my favorite thing about you is, and we would change the dynamic. Nobody was in trouble. We were just creatively changing the dynamic. You've got a child who won't complete their chores. Now, you could tie access to a computer as a resource, and those resources are only available if you do your part. And if you don't do your part, then you don't have access to the resources that are only available because everybody does their part. That's how you would logically tie in access to a computer or access to a resource, because that resource is only available if everybody does what they need to do. Curses. They have to use 3 funny alternatives. Why not go ahead and have some fun with it and maybe get a giggle? But be consistent. Do it every time. They struggle with homework. And I'm going to introduce the idea of the body double. The body double is just simply by being in the room, you make it easier for someone to accomplish something. And if you're in the room and you're also doing something that sucks, that's why I call it the scud hour, then it becomes particularly helpful that, you're not enjoying yourself. I'm not enjoying myself. No one's enjoying themselves. So, I can kind of buckle down and get something done. And then those of you that know me know that impulsivity, I believe, to be an absolute critical component of who we are and how we interact with the world. And so if you do get behavior that isn't appropriate and it seems like it's impulsive, redirect or do nothing. Because when you consequence impulsive behavior, it's like consequencing a diabetic for having low blood sugar. Let's talk about redirection for a second and consequences. Know what you can and can't control. Consider establishing consequences in advance to things that are common. Practice framing consequences in the positive. And that is one of the most wonderful creative pieces that we offer. Instead of saying, if you don't fulfill your chore, then you're not going to have access to the computer. How could you reframe that? When you finish taking out the trash and vacuuming the living room, you will have full access to the computer for 2 hours. Never threaten a consequence you're not going to follow through with. You know what happens when you do that? And even more so when you plead with a strong-willed child, they think to themselves, oh, you're weak. I must crush you. Ensure consequences keep their power. One of the terrible mistakes that parents make is they're like, okay, you know what? That computer's gone for a month. Well, guess what you just took away from you as a positive consequence for pro-social and quality behavior for a month. That's right. You need that computer as a carrot as much as they need it for their entertainment. There's an effective way to use timeout and a not effective way. And the effective way is to say, okay, take a time out and then no more communication. The ineffective way of taking a time out is continuing to pepper them and talk to them and try and engage them while you're taking a time out. And there's a difference between time out and chill out. Chill out is, okay, everyone take a break from it. Time out is a consequence that gets used with a small child. And of course, I believe that being consistently is critical to consistent positive behavior. Just a couple more here. When talking with a child, get at or below eye level and speak in a calm, reassuring voice. Do you know how powerful it is when your child is escalated and you don't follow them? And in fact, you kind of try and just drop the calm bomb and bring them down a little bit. It's just incredible. Be willing to disengage. You do not have to attend every argument that you were invited to. If you've heard my workshops before, you've heard me say that before. You do not have to attend every argument that you are invited to. And then help children develop appropriate ways to express their anger or to lash out. One of the more creative things that we did as parents for our children is that we came up with a way for them to tell us when they thought we were being unfair and they were really angry with us. And they could say that in a way that we could hear that, because prior to that, there was a lot of screaming, crying, and yelling and name calling, but we were really just trying to help them understand how to create a dynamic that was healthy and positive. And eventually, what my son at an early age came up with was, this is making me feel bad. You're making me feel bad. And then we would talk about what it was about that made them feel bad. But I mean, if he had said to me, I think you and mom are real jerks right now, and I'm very angry with you, that would be okay. Because they even that little bit of name calling, they're really attributing a feeling for the behavior or what they're not getting from us, and having an appropriate way to lash out is just critical. We talked about impulsivity, but ignore, redirect, consequence if it's safety oriented, or plan or find ways to utilize it. Redirectors, a light touch or squeeze, pointing to an area of redirection, or a gesture like, if I pull a tug on my ear, this means, hey, things are getting a little out of control. You might want to kind of reel it in a little bit, and they know that that's a code, and it's creative and unique enough that they're like, oh yeah, I've had my son look at me and be like, oh, okay, right. Because we're he kind of liked that we were communicating without anyone else knowing what that meant. Verbal redirectors, prompts, code words. Again, if many of you know that my family has a code word for me when I start to get too silly or aggravational, and they tell me that goofy, I get goofy. Goofy means stop. It's not fun. I don't like it. And the use of humor is one of the most creative ways that we can engage our kids. And then a change of subject, can be critical to creative parenting, right? Because things are starting to escalate, emotions are getting heightened, and then you say, "Hey, remember that time that we were on that beach and we built that sandcastle, and then." Then we went body surfing, and you remember when Dad just got totally trashed by the wave, and you twist that, and now you're not in that moment anymore. So as promised, I'm going to share with you and I've done so before, but I'll share with you a very, very intimate moment with my son. He tells the story all the time and has given me permission to share it. But I got a phone call from my wife who said, get home, Jay wants to hurt himself. I think the word she used was kill. And I got home very quickly. And the truth was, it was just a really awful day for Jay to be Jay. And he really is kind of one of those I wish I hadn't been born days for him. And so instead of talking about it, we went outside and we experientially did a workshop. We redirected, and we did a little workshop on how to start a fire with flint and steel. And he had to work on it for about half an hour to do that. And it was hard and it was difficult. And when he finally got it done, he was so proud of himself. And I asked him what it felt like, and he said, Christmas morning. And then we began the conversation about talking about why it felt so good. And it felt good because it didn't come easy, and he had to work at it, and he wanted to quit, but he didn't quit, but he kept going. And in so doing, he used real grit, and he earned this thing. And so sometimes the tough days are what make the wonderful, magnificent days even more beautiful and more worthy. This behavior management workshop or webinar began with my dad. I'll let it end with my dad. And then I would like you to unmute and share perhaps your most creative parenting solution that you've come up with for us to learn from, because so many of you have some great ideas, and I would love at least 3 of you to share a really creative parenting idea. And I'll let you collect your thoughts while I tell you this last one. I was 15 years old, and we were it was the very first time I ever snuck out of the house. And when I got home, I crawled in my window, and I'd done the whole make pillows so I looked like I was in bed. And when I crawled back into my window, there my dad was standing there in the dark. Dad, Dad, and he turned around and said nothing and walked back to his bedroom. Now, I would have been tempted to, take my son to task if I caught him doing that. But it was enough for my dad for him to know that he knew. And the next day, when we talked about it, he came at it not from the perspective of, yo, boy, are you in trouble? He came at it from the perspective of, let's create an environment here where you don't feel the need to do that. And I don't have to worry about where you are. It's funny. When he turned around and walked out of the dark room and said nothing, I made the terrible mistake of following him. Dad. And while he had nothing to say, I woke my mom up, and she had plenty to say. All right. Who is willing to share some of their most creative parenting moments, whether it was creative parenting that your parents used with you, or creative parenting that you may be exhibited? And you have to unmute yourself. And certainly if you're willing to come on camera, you can, but who's willing to share? Anybody?
Hi, I can share something.
Great. Who is online? Who is talking?
It's Kara Davis.
Oh, Kara, thank you so much.
Well, I guess one thing that we do in our house is if my child doesn't want to be involved in the family activity, then we'll do something. We'll have it anyway, and we'll have fun. Like, let's say usually something fun, but she wants to disengage and not be part of the family. We'll continue and make sure that we do the activity without her, have a lot of fun, and make sure she knows it. So we'll play a card game or do a puzzle, and we'll laugh and talk and sort of tell stories. And then she seems to always come down and decide she wants to join in.
Yeah, I love that. It's funny. We'll do a planned activity, and the kids will complain about it. And then at the end of the day, don't they almost always say, I'm so glad we did that. That was so much fun.
Yes.
That's great. Thank you, Kara. All right. Do we have anybody else that's as brave as Kara?
I think I can share something.
All right. Who's this?
This is Nicole.
Hey, Nicole.
Hi. I've been having a tough time with my son, like being motivated to declutter in his room. He just, organizationally, that's challenging for him. So, a couple of times I'll just get a box for both of us and I'll be like, you're in your room, I'm going to go in my room, and each of us are going to fill this box in a certain time frame. And then we meet and either we'll do something like try to tell the best story about something in our box. It'll actually be like a challenge. Like we'll make up stories about the different things in our box. And then whoever's story is the coolest, they get to choose, like TV program for the night or something like that. And then one time, I don't usually like to use money, but one time I told my son that he had to be a salesman and sell me everything that was in his box.
Oh, I love it.
So it was like, like old papers, and he would have to make it sound cool. And then I'd be like, okay, that's good for a quarter or something like that. So, yeah, that's it.
Do you know what the best part about that, Nicole, is for me? And that is that you took a task and you turned it from being a task to a quest. And the fun thing that made that quest so fun was that it included creativity, and you even made it a little bit of a competition.
Right.
It's interesting. As a segue, next month my webinar is going to be how to make things a quest, nurturing goals for your family, and so I love that's a wonderful springboard for that. We have time for one more brave soul to jump in. Who is willing to follow Nicole's great story?
Hi, John. I can share.
All right, who's this?
Alex Bergman.
Okay, Alex, go ahead.
So I think with my son, and he's been to SOAR and it's been wonderful. But for him, really what's worked the best parenting strategy is just whenever he's upset or, doesn't want to do something that I'm asking him to, I just say, what's up? And then I just pause. And by, kind of putting it back on him, then I feel I get more engagement, and usually that kind of helps de-escalate where before it would just become a power struggle.
Yes. So. I have had kids when I ask the question, what's going on or what's up, and they give the inevitable answer of, I don't know. Right. And my answer to the I don't know question has been, well, if you did know, what would you tell me? And so thank you so much, Alex, for sharing with that. I hope you all choose to join me next month. It's a awfully fun webinar on December 14th on Make It a Quest. New Year's resolutions are just about as worthless as the week that we stopped doing them. But quests are a journey. So I appreciate your time today. Thank you all so much for joining us. Please have a wonderful rest of your month. Happy Thanksgiving to you all, and we will see you on the 14th. Bye, everybody.